Let's start it. So, shall we start?
Yes, Professor, the webinar is live now.
Welcome to the Siddhi webinar series. Today's talk will be by Professor Arun Narasimhan of Mechanical Engineering, IIT Madras. Arun is a very versatile writer. His writings cover the entire gamut of writing genres like science writing, translation, fiction, non-fiction, musicology, and other things as well. So actually, just to say a few words about the Siddhi webinar series, this is actually to commemorate the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. It's actually now the 151st, but this was actually as a memoriam to his 150th birth anniversary. So we wanted to have a kind of a platform. Siddhi platform was meant for synergies, to bring in synergies between various approaches, to be technology, development, arts. So we wanted to create a kind of a socially relevant approach to the Gandhian principles. And as a technology institute, we wanted to ensure that technology works for the people. So that was the main aim of the Siddhi webinar series. We have covered several themes, and today's talk will be by Professor Arun Narasimhan. The title of the talk is The Right Thoughts. And welcome all of you. We welcome the Kenyan IITM faculty team as well, Professor Sean Decatur and others as well. Now I hand over the microphone to Professor Raghunathan Rangaswamy, Dean of Global Engagement, IIT Madras, to say a few words about the speaker as well as Siddhi. Then over to Arun. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Raghunathan Rangaswamy. Let me start my video. As Sudarshan mentioned, we started this webinar series in commemoration of Mahatma Gandhi's 150th birth year. However, initially the thought was to have a few webinars, but we realized that we could use this platform to basically look at socially relevant problems using technology. And given the nature of the world that we live in, we also thought that it is easy to bring in international speakers and international audience and so on. And that's the reason why our Office of Global Engagement is engaged with this. So basically 3 themes of society, technology, and internationalization, so that we bring in the best of the minds to tackle problems that we could using technology. That's the basic idea of Siddhi. We've had multiple seminars in this, as Sudarshan mentioned, covering a wide variety of topics, very exciting topics that have been covered. Today, we are very fortunate to have Professor Arun Narasimhan, who is a very accomplished engineer, a mechanical engineer, an aficionado of Carnatic music. I've read many of his articles on Carnatic music, and is also a prolific writer. So this is a combination which is not usually available in IIT system. So in that sense, he's a very unique individual. I see him multiple times while we cross paths while walking in our beautiful campus. And it's very nice to introduce him here and listen to him today. Thanks for doing this, Arun, and over to you.
Shall I share my screen?
Please do.
Yes.
Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Raghu, for the introduction. Thank you, Sudarshan, for the introduction. Welcome, participants, for the workshop. Good evening to you all, those who have tuned in the web streaming of Siddhi in YouTube. This is a pre-workshop talk to provide a summary of what is to come, perhaps, a premonitory, perhaps, like the sound of a bell before the elephant arrives. Hopefully, I shall be easing you all into the writing workshop that's going to be there for some 3 or 4 days. Let me begin with the identifier I chose for the talk. English academic, Tamil writer. What I mean by that? I have done science, engineering science, and communicated the outcome of it through research papers and books, primarily in English language. In fact, I think in English while I do science. Certain science concepts I know and understand perhaps only in English. They are fixed in my brain only with English language sentences. We primarily do learn Western science via English and do it in English. My popular science books are in Tamil language for a purpose because we don't have them here yet. My scientific writing, so to speak, is primarily in English. My science writing is primarily in Tamil. Let me explain the difference in this talk. I've also written music concert reviews in both Tamil and English for newspapers and magazines. I've stopped doing it now for some years. As a critic, you lose a bit of your enjoyment of the art. As a honest critic, you lose more of your friends in that art. From experience, I'm speaking. But this form of writing, music criticisms, it is non-fiction. It's not fiction. It's not science writing. Other examples of non-fiction, travelogues, personal essays, but not social media updates. As you can observe, my roles are well delineated by my writing language. Career in English, calling in Tamil. But then, in my career, who's a professor, which I am now, a professor is not only a teacher. He's not only a researcher. He's not only a scientist. A professor is one who professes a subject. Professors, I mean, thinks about the subject or subjects all his waking time. A Newton professed nature, while a Tolstoy professed human nature. But there are caveats for a novelist as well. A novelist is not a poet. He's not a reporter. He's not a sociologist. He's not a philosopher. While an art critic is a failed artist, perhaps, a science critic is not failed, but perhaps a grumpy one. In general, non-fiction writers are at least short-term experts of their chosen writing topic. And I'm not going to delve more in non-fiction. As a scientist and academic, you seem to have various forms of writing, science writing, non-fiction writing, and a different, if not opposed kind, fiction writing. As a professor, I do various kinds of writing that are not fiction. I do research articles, monographs, textbooks, thesis, yours and mine, grant proposals, so on and so forth. I review all of them. These lecture notes, these slides I prepare, they are all forms of writing, science writing, academic writing. And science writing I mentioned here. Is that different from all of the above? We shall see in this lecture. Importantly, all of what a professor writes, they are all not fiction. I better not write fiction here. I already have so many types here, right? But as a novelist or a fiction writer, I have fewer choices. Choices that involve creative fiction writing are like novels, short stories, plays, movie scripts, poems. If we relax on the purity of the text, perhaps, and include context through visuals, let us say, we can include visual novels and comics also as a creative outlet for a novelist. And perhaps backstories of video games nowadays. Scripts for animation movies, if you say, they are covered already in movie scripts, okay? So that leaves reviews, criticisms, forewords, memoirs, personal essays, even when done by a fiction writer or a science writer. They all come under non-fiction. We may not touch upon them more in this talk, but they are forms of creative writing as well. So many forms of writing are here. So who are these for? Who is the target reader for all this? Immediately we can say, why? Why do you ask that question? Is that important at all? Yes, very much so. This cartoon I made some years back out of whim. So the scientist in this cartoon creates a theory and tries to communicate it to a school kid who's standing close by there. For that scientist, from his vantage, where what he's expounding here in the blackboard there, it may make sense. It may be even simple for him. But for the school kid, without prior knowledge, prior subject knowledge, the school kid merely waits for the opportunity only to pull his prank on the blackboard. The communication doesn't result in a deserving understanding of ideas here, however important and urgent they may be. The scientist has targeted the wrong reader to communicate his research ideas. That's what we see here. So before identifying a target reader, it's perhaps better to know more about the scientist writer and his writings. So let me introduce you to the concept of tower of knowledge. It serves equally well for art and science, but we now start with science. The picture here shows a temple tower from my hometown, by the way, one of the tallest such structures in Asia. I'm using that as a visual metaphor here. The base of the tower is crowded with the common ideas, common in understanding to any lay contemporary public, while the top is populated with subtle ideas in any particular subject. Subtle is the Lord. The science examples shown here, let us say we pick the concept of a solar eclipse. It can be explained and understood well by most of us who are at the bottom of the tower. As we climb the tower of knowledge, more prior knowledge is required to understand the progressively diffuse and subtle concepts. Understanding, for instance, the workings of Kepler's laws of planetary motion. They require at least school level education, prior knowledge of some physics. Understanding the workings of general relativity, it requires tensor calculus, for instance, graduate college level education. In art, as I said, this tower concept can be equally used. In art, we could interpret the tower with progressive experience of years to appreciate the subtleties of prose and associated feelings. The target reader of a research article, now we can see, written by a scientist, is another scientist. It's not a school kid. A research article is written for peers. It presumes expertise from the reader. And the contents are unique and determined by the peer-to-peer readability of this type of writing. It presumes certain prior knowledge from the reader. The content should follow the tenets of written communication of scientific knowledge, must contain original research results, extension of or what is in relation to what is existing knowledge. It should clearly assert. It should be creative, but it should also be repeatable. It should follow scientific method. It should be falsifiable, what you are presenting as data or results or conjectures. The language should be free of ambiguity of expression. It's neither art nor fiction. No feelings need be expressed in the written content of a research article. At least I have not done so. No abstract have I read that begins, let us say, we are exceptionally thrilled to report in this tragic work, so on and so forth. Right. No, I haven't read an abstract of that kind. A research article is not fiction. On the other hand, a research article can be considered a fake. A research article is a rather dry document. Its excitement stems from prior knowledge and post-processing by a suitable reader. It's in fact fake, as I am saying. It strives to report a slice of truth, but makes special effort to cover up how the truth is arrived at. We know how the research article looks like. It has a title, or it begins with a title, it goes to an abstract to summarize what's to come. There is an introduction about what's it about, what are the methods it followed, what are the results and discussions that it generated, and what's the conclusion it's going to tell. That's how the research article reads for us when we read it, but that's not how it is made. You start with some hunch. As the cliche goes, you claim that idea came to you in the shower and construct experiments, if any, to check the validity of that hunch. You do some 70 odd experiments that fail to go either way. You do more experiments, refining, retuning, until you get data that could be interpreted under duress to suit or deny your hunch. You torture the data to either suit or deny your hunch. Remember, negative results are potential research findings that could be reported in a research paper. And then you realize the findings should be relevant to the scientific community. So you begin a literature survey at the end to establish the work is not already reported in that exact form and can be claimed original if not useful, and so on and so forth. Right. So in that sense, the research article, that the way you present it is already a fake. Oh, by the way, the number, the 4312, that reminds me of something. I can give another example in science that follows such progression. Thermodynamic laws. The laws of thermodynamics, that is. 4 laws we have agreed upon so far in thermodynamics, if you know. They are called typical to bland, no feelings exposed naming convention of science. Let us say they are called 0th law, 1st law, 2nd law, and 3rd law. Most of you will know that. A newcomer to the subject, learning it from a professor like me, would assume the laws were found or created in that order. No. 2nd law came first. 1st law came second. 0th law came third. That's why it's named 0th law. We don't have room for what to do with it. And 4th law came fourth. So an historical approach to teaching this would reveal their correct order of discovery or formulation. But it will also perhaps confuse most of us about how the subject is laid out. That's why we don't do it that way in teaching. A research article is, on the other hand, it has fixed narrative. Well, how it is done is not really revealed. It could be several days or even years that have taken to generate the data, collect the data, and complete the research. That doesn't come out when you read the article. It has a fixed narrative to be completed in few hours of reading. You compare this with fiction, let us say. We can compare and contrast this fixed narrative approach of a research article with what happens in fiction. Here I have given some examples, for instance. Let me pick one. Let us say The Dead, a short story by James Joyce. It's in his first collection of short stories, Dubliners. Right. So events leading to a particular poignant moment are explained in detail. I'm avoiding spoilers in that story, let us say, between a couple, a married couple for quite some time. They are married. Okay. So events leading to a particular poignant moment for that couple are explained in detail there in that short story. One wonders why such events, very ordinary events, are described for pages and pages. But when we reach the moment in the story, that poignant moment that I'm saying, we know why. The entire narrative is set up to provide maximum impact while we read about that moment. The blandness, the ordinariness of whatever happened so far in life, how it contrasts with that particular poignant moment. That's what the writer is driving at. That is the flexibility of narrative in fiction. It is part of the creative process, that narrative itself. Other examples I have given here, quickly I can go. Death of Ivan Ilyich, for instance. Entire life of Ivan is described in few pages, just few pages by Tolstoy. But then the moment before his death, it takes equal number of pages later on, because that's what he wants to delve on in this story. Ulysses, for instance, if you have read that or if you are attempted to do that, it's just one day. That entire novel is just one day for several characters. It runs to 1,000 pages, right? Two other examples here. You have entire life in contrasting styles presented. Anton Chekhov, he didn't want to write any novel at all. He is the master of short stories. He wrote only perhaps some 6 short novels. One of that is this My Life that I'm putting here. So he has an entire life of a person covered in a short novel, while the other one, In Search of Lost Time, if you've heard of that, it's from French translated, Marcel Proust. He started it writing in some 38, when he was 38. Up to 38, whatever life he has led, he just recounted it, In Search of Lost Time, in 7 volumes, around 3,200 pages, right? So in fiction, we have such kind of flexible narrative as part of the creative process for the actual time of events. Actual time versus narrative time is a tool for creation. So let us explore the recipe for science writing a bit further, which brings us to the concept of tower of knowledge I'm introducing here. The writer tower and the reader tower. The left is the writer tower and the right is the reader tower, as you can see. At the base, we have more persons with less knowledge in both sides, or subject expertise, so to speak, in both the towers than at the top. A research article now, you can see, communicates from top to top. That is from top of the writer tower to the top of the reader tower, from scientist to scientist. Scientific writing happens there. That's what you can see. At the bottom is an example we mentioned already. It can be explained by a journalist who is not a scientist doing original research. But a journalist can explain what is solar eclipse to a diligent reader in a newspaper article, perhaps. But it is only when the writer at the top of the writing tower attempts to communicate to other readers in the reading tower, only then science writing happens. Mostly, it now happens with journalists trying to raise themselves up, jump up in the writing tower. In the writer's tower, they try to raise themselves up and then try to do it for the other readers here on the right side, for the reader tower. But only when the writer at the top in the writer tower attempts to communicate to other readers here, science writing, genuine, good science writing happens. If scientists don't complement their scientific writing, that is top to top, their comfort zone of research reporting to peers, if they don't complement that with their science writing, attempt at communicating that research findings to the diligent reader, let's say, a glass ceiling is actually forged permanently between important and contemporary, if not superior and common knowledge, superior knowledge and the common public. A glass ceiling is formed between them. An immediate and an urgent example, you can see in this current pandemic situation, how many misinformed non-scientists, many of them without any science background, and few of them well-meaning journalists, they have all attempted to shoo away the pandemic with their writing, right? To mask or not to mask in public. Even that became a matter of debate and denial in some countries. More because the relevant subject matter experts, that is, writers at the top of the writer tower, subject matter experts either couldn't communicate or couldn't convince the general public through their science writing how viral diseases spread among humans, right? Since when general relativity gets explained to the general reader then, on the other hand, right? Not in the research article written by the scientists to other scientists. You can see the research article titles here that is about general relativity. Find one here. But it happens only in the science writing done by that scientist, meant for the general public, as you can see here. Of course, the intelligent public that the scientist presumes should raise up to the level that the scientist presumes, the knowledge level. Not of a scientist, but at least that of a diligent school kid, right? That brings us to the recipe for good science writing. A research article is written for the peers. A science writing or popular science article is not written for peers. It's written for any intelligent reader. It presumes little expertise from the reader. The rest of it, none of that need to be valid here or essential here. The primary objective of science writing is the exposition of an idea in simple terms, using simple day-to-day examples and imagery, perhaps in a story form even. Remember, the target reader is not sitting at the top of the reader tower. On the other hand, of course, science writing is not fiction. It's not art. Language should be free of ambiguity of expression to convey objective inferences or ideas. Right. But good science writing picks up the key idea right at the beginning. Unlike a research article, perhaps, it goes about its exposition even as a story. Some features and questions while we do science writing are how far away to begin and how much further to go. Right. So no prior knowledge for the reader, should I assume? Meaning no prior knowledge? Should I begin at elementary school level? Some prior knowledge or language skills can always be assumed to place this article somewhere in the middle of the reader tower, right? So how much further to go? That again depends on the prior knowledge assumed. Contrast this with fiction. What is the length of a short story, for instance? Where to begin? How to go about it? One explanation of a short story is it is fiction that begins as close as possible to the end. Think about it. Does that mean it should be very, very short, as the name implies, short story? No. Only it should be just enough to make the necessary impact. This visual could explain the point. More the text in a short story, it better be like a taut pulled string of a bow with an arrow there. When released or when it reaches the end from that far away, it should pierce the heart. It should better have maximum impact in the reader's heart, else reduce the text of a short story. Right. In contrast to research article writing, good science writing begins with a good title. Start with a good title, not end with it like you did it for a research article. Begin with a title. You can see here how the research article title befuddled us. These are some of my research article titles, if you can read them. They make sense only to whom they are written for, other scientists, that is, right? But on the other hand, when I attempt science writing, popular science article titles should be more accessible. Why do elephants have ear flaps? That's a nice title. It asks a question. And then the content. A no math version or a yes math version follows, right? A no math version is aimed somewhere in the middle of the reader tower that I mentioned earlier. So the trick of having a title in a question form, for instance, is the content of the article presents itself even to the writer. The writer even knows what to write because he has to answer the question. That's all he has to do. The content of the article should be only that. The content should be presented as an answer. Why do elephants have ear flaps? The short answer is written here. Warm-blooded animals require to maintain a constant core body temperature. So they should not lose more heat. So they evolve thermoregulation mechanisms to promote energy exchange with their surrounding. Elephants do this exchange with their ear flaps. So larger their size, the size of the elephant, that is, larger their size and hotter the climate, they need to throw away the heat. So larger are their ear flaps. That's the short answer. The long answer, if you want, that follows as the article itself. This is where a no math version is aimed for somewhere at the middle of the reader tower. And for readers with school level understanding of science, let us say. So what more to write? Each of the technical terms of the short answer can be explained to improve clarity of the required understanding, for instance. The writer can pose himself more questions and keep answering them in the content if he doesn't know how to go about it. For instance, what are warm-blooded animals? Or what is thermoregulation? How many thermoregulation mechanisms are there? What is energy exchange here? What kind of energy are you talking about? What kind of energy you are not talking about here? So do this exchange with ear flaps you mentioned. So don't they do it with their body? It's even bigger than the ear flaps. Why do they do it only with their ear flaps? These are some questions that you can pose to yourself. And these are questions naturally to comes to a person who's on the other end of the reading tower, right? So you answer them, you are explaining more and more in an interesting way about this answer. So larger their size and hotter the climate, larger are their ear flaps, you say. That's an inference you are saying, right? So how did you conclude this? So you can do that with or without equations. But what we have to remember is we have to explain it in simple words. So this is how far we can go. Can we go even further? Of course, we can go further. For instance, what if some of the terms explained here are not valid, are not true for some animals, let's say? What happens then? For instance, what if elephants live in colder climates, let's say? Woolly mammoths lived there. They are even bigger than African elephants. So do they have big ear flaps? No, they don't. Which means they have smaller ear flaps because they have less heat to throw away. They already live in colder climates. They don't want to throw away the heat in their body. They want to preserve the heat. So they don't require large ear flaps, even though they are bigger in size than the African elephants, right? So such more interesting content follows. And then the same content could be presented in a semi-technical fashion. Science writing, but in a semi-technical fashion. That is, you raise the bar in the target reader tower that we mentioned, right? That determines, in a sense, the nature of your science writing, with or without equations. But then it is a trade-off, as Stephen Hawking puts it here. For every equation that you have in your book, a popular science book, the sales of it should be halved, right? Well, that's true or not, that is a caution, let's say. That's a trade-off. And then there are further recipes that can be ascertained for good science writing. Science writing specifies and builds. I'm giving you a exemplary book here on writing well by the one and only William Zinsser, who is no more with us. He passed away a few years back. When I started my PhD, I got recommended this book by a genetic biologist. I'm forever grateful to them. Right. So we can say science writing specifies and builds. And where Zinsser prescribes more recipes. It specifies and builds like an inverted tower, an inverted pyramid, or a tree that branches up and out from a trunk. So it builds from known towards the lesser known. It describes how something works, good science writing. It relates to a person or common imagery. So I can say, to summarize these things, in that sense, we can say science writing communicates an objective idea in a subjective way, in a story format even, because the other end is occupied by a person. To compare with the research article now that we discussed earlier, you can see all kinds of academic writing that I did. I'm just putting it all in this boxes here in various slots, right? So now we can differentiate and appreciate the difference between scientific writing and science writing. What is important to see in this is the same person, the scientist, can do all of them. He can do the scientific writing and he can do the science writing. We can now appreciate the reader can also be anyone. He can pose as a scientist or he can be just an intelligent reader. Right. And then, do we have some other recipes? Is there anything more? Yes, there always is. But we can touch upon one pertinent point here. Explain with simple words, we said in science writing. We didn't say that for research article. Right, perhaps we should, but we didn't say that. In science writing, we said explain with simple words. What do we mean by that? How simple? What is simple, by the way? What if my concepts are tough? Ideas should be diluted, you mean? Of course not. The writing should be as free as possible from jargon. That's all we mean. Genuine measure exists to check that we are doing so in our writing. One such measure I'm giving here is called a fog index. Right, there is a complete formula even for that. You write an article, you count your words and your sentences there and go about applying them here as numbers there. And then you arrive at a number, right? That's what we do nowadays, right? We just count things. So we have a measure here for fog index. So you arrive at, let's say, for your article, somewhere near 12, which means it implies that article can be even read by an 8-year-old literate. That's what a fog index means. So at least the language is simple, free of jargon. That's what it says. Not many complex words are there. That's what it concludes. Correct. But we have to remember, clear doesn't mean correct. So obviously a lower fog index is believed to improve clarity. But clarity is not equal to correctness. Improving clarity by oversimplifying should not come at the cost of correctness of the science explained. Also, clear doesn't imply it is going to be interesting. It can be clearly boring, like this talk could become if I don't change the topic now, let's say. Let me revisit the knowledge tower. In light of the fog index or minding the knowledge level of the reader tower. On the reader side, I have placed the measures of fog index. Any content in principle can be placed anywhere on the reader tower by a good science writer. So general relativity by a good science writer, he can be a scientist, but by a good science writer can be explained to more readers, not only to scientists. There can be a yes math version or a no math version. It's up to the science writer, right? The same science writer can do solar eclipse to more readers or elevate it to a research level as well. And a journalist can raise himself to become a better science writer as well, right? All this is possible here. Once you understand what's going on about target readers and who am I as a science writer, where am I here in the knowledge tower? So is there a quick pointer on how to achieve clarity that you are saying about this fog index that we crave for? In science writing, Zinsa said, write like a person, not like a scientist, even though you may be one. I would like to slightly modify it. Think like a scientist. Don't be otherwise. You think like a scientist if you are one, but write like a person. Remember, at the other end, the knowledge tower, that person at the other receiving end, you can relate to him only as a person, not as a scientist, right? In this sense, science writing communicates, again, as I mentioned, an objective idea in a subjective way, as could be understood by another person. Then there are limits proposed by Einstein himself, both the limits. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So he proved his point by writing theory of relativity for the public. So if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Good. Okay, I understand that. But on the other hand, he also cautioned, make everything as simple as possible, but not simpler. Don't oversimplify it. Don't lose correctness. Don't dilute things. much, right? So you, for clarity, and then you lose the correctness of it or the validity of it. So these are riders that we can have. So the summary presents itself here. Science writing summary, various forms of scientific writing and science writing you can now see. And remember, the same person can write any of it. Likewise, the same person can want to be any reader type I said in the reader tower. For one topic, I may want to be at the top of the reader tower because that's my subject matter of expertise. I want research content for that. While for another topic, genuinely new to me, I may want to sit somewhere else on the reader tower and wait for a good science writer to reach me or reach out to me. Now we go to fiction. Where are we in that? Compare this situation to art writing. By art writing, I mean fiction writing, literature writing, what we call as literature, right? Fiction. There is fiction, and it is written by a novelist or storyteller, and the reader is supposed to read it and get it. That's it. We don't have several kinds of art writing, nothing. No, nothing. We have fiction. And then a novelist generates fiction, a storyteller. And then a reader has to get it, read it and get it. That's it. Well, then it generates opinions like this, right? Bill Watterson is an alma mater of Kenyon College. That's why I'm borrowing ideas from him for Calvin, through Calvin. Art is a private language for sophisticates to congratulate themselves on their superiority of the rest of the world. Is that true for fiction? Why this opinion about fiction prose? We didn't say that for science. Because we seem to have formulated different kinds in science writing. So, should such opinions be brushed aside as ignorance for art? Or is there something in it? Let us revisit the tower and use it for fiction writing and say, let us say we have a fog index. Does it apply to fiction prose as well to improve clarity of it? Why don't we say that? Why don't we apply fog index for fiction, genuine fiction prose, and find out which writers are the worst kind in terms of clarity? Do we do that? We don't do that. Why? We need to know something about art or creative fiction writing, what it is, before we check for its clarity or seeming lack of knowledge towers here. Let us begin with what is art, as told to us by Tolstoy. Although in this book, in this long essay, he told more about what is not art, let us just get introduced at the basics of this. Right. Art, the written word of it, that's all I'm saying. I'm not talking about sculptures or paintings or like that. The written form conveys feelings from the writer to the reader. That's what it is. Writer, that's what Tolstoy says. Writer through the fiction should be capable of evoking intended feelings inside the reader. He can use words to describe what is inside of him, what is outside of him, what we call as Agam and Puram in Tamil. We have Agananuru and Purananuru, poems of hundreds of poems that describe what is inside, internal to us, what is outside to us, what we see out, right? But using all of that in fiction, in fact, even depiction of outside is used as a creative tool to describe the inside of a person or mind, the person who sees that outside, right? So these are tools. All of that is used to evoke intended feelings inside the reader. Fiction conveys feelings, right? Okay. So that means only personal experience is art or fiction? No. Personal experience lends authenticity. You don't have to kill, for instance, to portray murders in fiction or art. You can think about that. You can simulate blood and no one gets hurt. That's art. You can simulate rain, for instance, and no one gets wet. That is science, computational fluid dynamics. Those who are aware of it will know what I'm talking about. So what is it, this simulated blood you are talking about? Here is an example. To evoke feelings of fear and awe, we know the cry wolf story, right? We all know that. We all know it as a child. We know the cry wolf story. How the shepherd boy comes back from grazing cattle every day and describes the wolf that chases him and his cattle to the town folk, right? And the town folk, they believe him. They come to his rescue even, only to find no wolf, right? They go back. But then the boy again comes and tells and describes the wolf and generates and evokes genuine feelings of fear and awe in the listener or the reader's mind, let's say, through his description of the supposed event, how it chased him like that. That is art. That is already conveying feelings from the writer to the reader, from the creator to the listener, correct? So that is art already. That boy is already generating art. Of course, he need not have seen the wolf at all. Still, the town folk might believe him when he comes and tells a story, because his descriptions are so genuine. He generates the feeling of fear and awe in his description, through his descriptions. That is art, although he was lying completely. So he is creating art. That there was a wolf and it killed the boy later and no one came to his rescue and all, that is all incidental. That is all moralizing hogwash, if you want. Art has already been created by the boy. When the town folk believed his descriptions and felt fear and awe and pity and so on, they got generated the feelings that the boy intended them to have, right? So the story of the boy need not be true to become art. It's already art. That there was a wolf was entirely incidental and doesn't contribute to art, Nabokov said. Nabokov puts it very well, even. To call a story a true story is an insult to both art and truth, he said. You may wonder then, what about historical fiction, let's say? History happened, let us say. What about historical fiction? People are writing historical fiction. No, they are fictional accounts of true events. They are fictional accounts of true events. They are not true accounts of true events. If they are true events, if they are true accounts of true events, then they become memoirs or travelogues. All right. They are all non-fiction. Art is the other way. It's more like true account of fictional events. Fiction evokes feelings, not facts. One should not try to learn, let's say, about Victorian England by reading Charles Dickens. Read historians for that. Read Charles Dickens for his fiction to evoke feelings in you that he intended. Right. So a fiction writer who is not, we can see now, he's not a reporter. He doesn't just report what is happening there in newspapers. Reporters report in newspapers. A fiction writer is not a reporter. He's not a psychiatrist. He's not a sociologist. He's not a historian or ethnographer or a philosopher. No. None of that he is. You compare now with science writing. Science writing specifies and builds, we said. In fiction, it expands and ripples, actually. I bring in some other source to provide some clarity on these points. Let's say Isaac Bashevis Singer, another master of short story form, a poetic writer. Fiction in general should never become analytic, he says. Fiction in general should never become analytic. It's not science writing. Genuine literature informs while it entertains, he says. It entertains using feelings. I could say, in contrast, genuine science writing informs while it ascertains facts. Right, you can contrast these two now. Singer goes on further about fiction and fiction writers. Literature can very well describe the absurd, he says. It can be playful, it can describe the absurd, but it should never become absurd itself. Never go for style over substance, right? So one writer came to me and said, what you are doing now, I asked him, and what I am doing, he asked, and so we exchanged some notes, and he said, well, in Tamil, we don't have more magic realism, so I'm now going to write a novel with magic realism. I was surprised, genuinely. How do you know? Why do you ascertain a style before you know what its substance is? The substance should determine the style. That's what I thought. So at least Singer agrees with me. The zeal for messages has made many writers forget that storytelling is a rise in the door of artistic prose. It's just storytelling. We are storytellers first, primary, in fiction writing. We are not philosophers. We are only storytellers. At its best, as poignantly put by Singer, art can be nothing more than a means of forgetting human disaster for a while. An enchanter foremost is a prose writer, fiction writer, Nabokov said. He said, a fiction writer is a storyteller, a teacher, and an enchanter. A fiction writer who he's not a propagandist, he's not a moralist, he's not a prophet, certainly. A major writer should be more of an enchanter, he said. If a fiction writer is capable of conveying feelings through words, who is a fiction reader then? Right. There is the boy who creates art with his wolf story. And who are these townfolks? Who are these readers? An ideal reader, according to Nabokov, is always a rereader. He reads and analyzes with his brain and enjoys with his art. In other words, in the words of Nabokov, that is, he reads with his backbone, he says. We can dovetail this with what Singer just mentioned, what I mentioned from Singer, who says about fiction. Genuine literature informs while it entertains. That is, it informs, serves the brain, and it entertains. That is, it evokes feelings and warms the heart. Right. So let us compare science writing with fiction. An important difference could be groped. I can only grope at it here. Good science happens already outside the reader, outside of the reader. It is then conveyed to her by good science writing. That's what I understand. Good science happens outside of the reader. By that I mean inventions or insights happen in a laboratory experiment, from field data perhaps, from abstract thinking by mathematicians, let's say. Right. Good fiction happens inside a good reader. In contrast, it is recreated inside her by good fiction writing. Think about it. Invention of feelings partly happens in the mind of the good reader. The townfolk felt awe and fear while they heard the boy describing the wolf. Right. Until then, they cannot feel about it. Part of the creation happens while it is read. Like a corny dialogue, I can say the reader completes the writer's fiction. Yeah, at this point, I should be reading my novels to evoke some feelings in the audience. I'm skipping this part because they are, first of all, entirely in Tamil language, and this talk is in English. Also, there is a reading session anyway coming up after this, so fiction reading will happen there. But what I want to mention here is the choice of language brings associated culture and clarity of conveyed feelings to improve the clarity, right? So that's what we started with, clarity, right? That brings us back to this opinion. Now that we know what fiction is or what it should do, can we see why this opinion persists among us about art and fiction? Is there merit in this opinion now, can we say? Let me revisit the knowledge tower and try to impose it now for fiction. In fiction, the writer conveys feelings through prose, right? While conveying feelings with prose, the writer is usually unaware of the positions in the reader tower while doing it in fiction. It is up to the reader to raise himself or herself to receive that fiction. So the fiction writer says, genuine art elevates you. According to him, the reader tower collapses in art. So the fiction writer says, genuine art elevates the writer's part. He says that. The reader Calvin, on the other hand, retorts, but genuine muddle is universal, right? So the writer shakes his head and says, perhaps muggles, that's all. Contrast this situation with science writing. We said something about any content can be placed anywhere on the reader tower by a competent science writer. Are there not competent fiction writers? Is this not true for art? Not applicable in the case of fiction writers? One answer is, see, there are some scientists who write only research articles. That's my alarm timer. See, there are some scientists who write only research articles in their career and retire. Likewise, they don't involve themselves in science writing, I mean. Likewise, there are fiction writers who can create as only they can. This group of scientists and artists don't acknowledge in their mind the presence of a reader tower. We can do nothing about it. There is an alternate answer I want to give. In fact, an alternate way to think about fiction writing. To borrow from established recipes of science writing that we discussed so far and try to apply it for fiction writing. That's what I have proposed here in this slide. In other words, recognize the inevitable existence of reader tower in fiction as well. So can we present science writing and art writing as a social document, a scientific, objective way of constructing similar alternate realities to convey feelings effectively to anybody? What I want to call as an universal fiction by a writer to any reader, right? Of course, you can use any metaphors, narratives, or language, culture tropes, whatever, right? So what I'm talking about, I would like to think of this universal fiction or alternate versions of the same idea, just like in science writing. They are not research articles, but they are meant as popular science articles, we said there. So I'm saying alternate versions aimed at different depths of the reader tower in fiction, if you can agree upon one. I'm not talking about abridged versions or diluted versions of tomes, all right, like Reader's Digest publish. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm thinking more of alternate versions to evoke feelings of similar intensity among different individuals across cultures, across ages even. Think about it while you attend the workshop. Now let me summarize what I have done so far. Science writing communicates an objective idea in a subjective way, I said. Think of a person, not as a scientist, I said. So I can contrast that for art as well. Art writing communicates subjective feelings in an objective way, we can say. But both explore and analyze truths, and no permanent conclusions need be derived. So perhaps it's time to stop talking and start writing, right? So I want to end with this, what you're going to attend as workshops, right? Workshops can only teach or coach the craft, not the associated art or science. Thanks for listening.
So now is the time for Q&A. Thanks, Arun.
Yeah.
A couple of questions in the Q&A box. Would you like to take it?
Q&A box. Let me check on them. Right.
So one person has asked a question about writing vis-a-vis writing journal articles. Would you like to elaborate?
I have been writing for 1 year. The flow of words is coming like anything. Yeah, if we have writing difficulty, we have to read more. And there is one thing I can say. The first 1,000 pages of a fiction writer, we just need to throw it away. Whatever he thinks about it, he or she thinks about it, we just need to throw them away and then write again. Right. That's for a fiction writer, at least 1,000 pages. You have to throw away whatever he considered as important fiction that he has generated. So we have to simply throw them away and then start again. That's when he starts doing that. So you have a writing flow difficulty, that's nothing. You write more, keep writing more. Since you are Arivaragan and you are saying, I can see your Tamil name, Palaga Palaga Kalai. Right. Chittiramum Kai Palakam, Sendamulum Na Palakam. So you practice more for painting very well. So that's what I would say as an answer. Being a science writer, what inspires and motivates you to write more on science and arts writing? What inspires? No, I don't seek inspiration. The inspiration is the writing. I want to write, that's all. Writing is a form of expression. Expression is life, right? That's all inspires me. I don't have a separate inspiration for that. More than that. Is there any other questions?
There's actually a question about
Old world, yeah. As you said, if we want to understand the old world, we should read science or ethnography. Yeah, historians or old world, yeah, whoever attempts at that. If we want to know old people feelings, should we read literature or newspaper? No, we can't do that. We can't do that. So you want to know the feelings of a lost civilization. You cannot get that. But that doesn't mean a fiction writer gives it correctly. All right. So you cannot go back to a fiction writer and say, tell me about 1,000 years back, what people felt. How does he know? He also doesn't know that. He only imagines it. So you can agree upon that imagination or not. That's all. So you cannot know that. Feelings of dead people and gone, how can you know that? You cannot know that. What's your say on Sujata's writings being from his place? Aishwarya from Srirangam. Yeah, I am from Srirangam. I am from writer Sujata's hometown, let us say. What should I say about his writings? His writings have inspired me. He's a very good short story writer, world-class humorous writer, world-class humorous stories he has written. Right. And he has a very typical, very trend-setting Tamil prose writing style. He's not a good novelist. He's a good science writer, but not he hasn't attempted to explain very tough concepts to readers in order to elevate them. I don't think he did that. Pena Appusamy did that. All right. But on the other hand, Sujata has he's a forerunner in many things, a harbinger in many things. He brought in science fiction writing to Tamil. He has written very nice plays that are usually cast aside. He attempted explaining Tamil literature like Agananuru, Purnanuru, Alvargal, things like that to readers for the first time. So as introductions, they all serve a purpose. Correct. So yes, we all should go through Sujata's writings if we are interested in art and science. That's all I could say. I have never met him in my life, although I have seen him from afar. He has visited my high school and spoken once or twice. I have seen him from afar, just like he saw Gandhiji from somewhere far away. I have seen Sujata from far away. That's all is known. Okay, I think I've answered enough for Aishwarya. Please comment on science fiction. Science fiction, what is a comment there? A comment can be anything, but science fiction, you can think of as long as what is nowadays, they are not called science fiction, first of all. They are called speculative fiction. That's a more valid nomenclature for them, for such fiction, because they need not even have science. But if a fiction can speculate on a particular idea, extend an idea, alternate histories, for instance, people have thought of very interesting fiction people have written on. They don't have any science there, much science extensions, right? So yes, science fiction then becomes part of speculative fiction. So yeah, a genuine science idea, a novel idea that we have, if how it affects human nature, right? Because literature is about humans. You don't have literature without humans, or you can attempt at it. It's useless to humans. So literature is human relationships and about that, right? Which means how science affects such human relationships. That as long as a science fiction does that, it becomes good science fiction attempt. So speculative fiction could include all of that. That's what I would say. Can you please recommend some good short story writers in English? You don't want to know it from another writer. Writers are jealous people. They don't want to tell any other writers. And I have not written good short stories yet. Okay. So I know Tolstoy is one. I learned from. Okay, very good. So you already know Tolstoy is a good good short story writer. Pick like that. That's what I would recommend, Nitya. right? You can read two of them I already mentioned in my talk. There is Anton Chekhov. If you are already liking Tolstoy, you have a series of good writers from Russia, right? You can go before Tolstoy or after Tolstoy. And after Tolstoy, you have Chekhov if you want. You can go before Tolstoy. You can go up to, say, let's say Alexander Pushkin. You can read. There, he has written short stories, good short stories. Gogol, you can read. He has written a remarkable short story, The Overcoat. Singer is a very good one. Yes. Anonymous attendee. Okay. Why academic writings are a symbol of educational elitism? No, it is not. You are wrong there. That's all I should answer. You probably are reading wrong academic prose. That's all I would say. Okay. They do contribute to knowledge. You are not checking there. You are not checking in the right places. If you are more specific, I could answer that. Okay. How does a poignant writing is regarded as? A good one or a bad one, or it depends on the content? I don't follow your question, Harish. How does a poignant writing is regarded? Poignant writing is received well. Usually it should be. Anonymous attendee, how do you ensure that your varied writing styles, popular science, research writing, don't fuse into each other regardless of experience? How do you keep the purpose of the document intact? Just multiple reviews and corrections, or is there a strategy? For me, if you ask my experience, it so happened, as I mentioned earlier, my career is in English, my calling is in Tamil. So these got separated by themselves, or I keep it that way. I don't try to write prose fiction in English. I attempted and I failed miserably, and I don't want to write that in English. So that actually gives me a good separation, a demarcation. So how am I ensuring varied writing styles remain that way, right? But I don't know, should I tell you that as a recommendation? Yes, there are very nice prescriptions that you saw, even some of them in the talk, on how to write good science. And yes, by rereading, as you are saying, multiple reviews and corrections is one way to go. Certainly it corrects objectively non-fictions. It certainly does that. In fiction, you have to think more about what is the feeling you want to convey. If you are a fiction writer and a particular phase of fiction, you are getting stuck, or you want to revise, you want to know what is it you want to convey here. What is the feeling as a writer you want to evoke in the reader who is reading this? What is the feeling he has to get evoked by reading this, or reading this description? Is that coming powerfully enough, or is that coming correctly? Right. And that is how you have to revise it, the entire section. You probably have to throw away sections. You probably have to place sections by sections, before or after, one event or after. This event, will it happen after that event or before this event? So you have to think about it in a more universal way, not in a very local particular word or sentence. That comes later, right? Because in research article, you already have to have a title, you have to have an abstract, you have to have an introduction. You cannot have results first and introduction later. It's already set. But in fiction, you can have, you can directly go into something without any introduction. You can start with saying there is a headless man walked, something like that, right? How he lost his head and all, you can tell later. So you probably are right in the story, right at the first line. So you have to think about in blocks in fiction for revising. In science, you already mentioned how to do that. You yourself have mentioned. Would you have suggestions on any texts reflecting on writing and its process in Tamil? In Tamil, several writers have attempted. One contemporary one is by Jayamohan. Jayamohan has given nice pointers, nice prose on how to write good prose fiction in Tamil. Mamallan has done in the web. If you read his website, he has several nice essays in his website. You can read that. Yeah, of course, Sujata has given certain pointers, short writings on what he considered as good fiction and how to go about it. Right. But we can even go to T. Janagiraman. He has written essays on that if you read. So usually writers want to talk about how to do this, but all of them don't tell it very well. How to say this? There can be cooks, chefs. Chefs can be exemplary. Their dish can be exemplary. Their novels can be great, writers' novels. How to do this, if you ask them, they may not tell it correctly or clearly even. They won't even know how to tell that. So these are some examples that I can suggest in Tamil immediately. For a beginner scientific writer, a research scholar, any books you recommend to read, especially if any in Tamil? In Tamil, no. In Tamil, we don't have for research scholars, for sure. In English, we have several very nice things. Books by Peter Medawar, The Art of the Soluble. That's a very good one. I have in my website several of them listed. Why don't you read that? The article title is How to Do Research. It's there in my website, arun.me, arun.me. You are just Google my name and you should reach my website. In that you have how to do research, a separate article under which I have listed several such texts for beginner research scholars. How to go about research. Okay. Sudhakar. Vatsala asks, just as journalism has its ethics to uphold and portray the reality, does fiction have any obligation towards the truth? The only obligation is it should analyze and it should not conclude. That's all I would say. About truth, that's what I mean. It can analyze truth. It cannot conclude. Because, yeah, you can do that. You'll say you can conclude. You'll usually be proven wrong later. That's all. So that's the only obligation I would think. You can analyze truth. You can stretch it. You can see, is this true? How far is this true? Could this be wrong? When can it become wrong? Is it always true? All such analysis we can do. You cannot conclude much. This is the only absolute truth. Once you say that, once you exposit that in a fiction, you can enact that very well even. Somebody else will prove it wrong, usually. So that's the only obligation for fiction, truth. But it should certainly analyze that. Could you please recommend any books that teaches us how to write non-fiction and scientific articles? Yeah, what I showed here on writing well, there are some 4 editions of that. Pick anyone by William Zinsser. You must read that book. All of us should read that book on how to write non-fiction and scientific articles. Yes, you can read that too. And there are a few others, but this is a good place to start. Yeah, I think I've answered most of the questions that are here. Thanks for these questions and thanks for attending the talk. And Sudarshan, is there anything anybody else wants to know something about the talk?
I think we just have the vote of thanks, and Professor Karthik, who's actually the advisor global engagement, will give us a vote of thanks, and then we'll move to the next program, which is the inaugural. Thanks, Arun.
Very good. Thank you all.
Mm-hmm. Hey, thanks, Arun, for a wonderful talk. I really enjoyed it, and thanks to all the others who've shown up today. And I think we have a very exciting workshop coming up, and this was nice context on writing by Arun. I think he's inspired a lot of people from science and outside of science to really think seriously about writing, where they are writing a journal article or they're writing speculative fiction. So I think, I'd like to thank Arun once again for the talk. And I'd also like to tell you about the very interesting webinars that are coming up for the Education Week. It's still a while to go, but we have some really exciting webinars lined up on Jan 8th, 9th, and 10th. So by Rajesh Ganesan, by Ashish Jaiswal, and Dr. Piyush Ghosh. So I request you all to register for these webinars. We'll be circulating these details again shortly. And I wish you all a good evening. And I hope many of you will also participate in the future webinars and also keep track of our Kenyan writing series. Thank you all.
So we have the next inaugural session in a few minutes. I think Kamya Sharma will take over the comparing responsibilities for that program. And most of the panelists are already in the call. So we can probably discuss a bit about how the program is scheduled. Then we'll move to the next phase. Thank you, Karthik, and thank you, everyone.
Maybe we can pause the YouTube live for the next 15 minutes.
Yes.
Sure, Professor Karthik.